when I first started writing, I figured science fiction was just science fiction, pew pew lasers. That's it. I was I was told afterward by some reviewers that that is not the case. It's like a gradient. Like it goes
Yeah.
from hard to light sci-fi, right? And I put science fantasy at that light end of the whole gradient.
Do you love science fiction and fantasy books? You found yourself in the right dimension. Welcome to the greatest podcast in the multiverse, where each week I talk to science fiction and fantasy authors about myth, magic, and the infinite possibilities of storytelling. I'm your host, Herman Stuernagel, and I will be taking you on a journey with some of your favorite authors, helping you to get to know them and possibly uncover some new literary gems along the way. Ready to explore? Because on this show, every conversation is a doorway into a different world. Welcome to episode 9 of the greatest podcast in the multiverse. How are we already halfway through September? I feel like I've just gotten used to summer being over, and now we're 2 weeks into September already, which is just crazy to me. But hopefully things are going well with you. Today I am chatting with author T.A. Bruno, who is the author of several science fantasy books, including his most recent release, Down Below Beyond. We talk about his history in the film industry, how that has helped him to craft a better story, and as well we take a deep dive into the world that he has crafted. I don't have much for a personal update this week. I've been trying to get things ready for the launch of my book Chimera, which is happening in 2 weeks, as well as Resurgence, which is happening in November. I don't know why I decided that launching 2 books back to back was a great idea, but here we are. And I feel like this is my Resurgence will be my 9th release, and I feel like every release I forget how much work it actually is to get things ready. I realized this last week that I hadn't even gotten the blurb done for Resurgence, which is one of the most important things to do. So I put that together, and I got that to my cover designer so that he could add it to my paperback and hardcover books, so I could get ready for those to go on pre-order. So I got that done. They're ready to go, and you should be seeing pre-orders available for Resurgence. If they're not up already, they will be soon. Sometimes the hardcover takes a week or so, but the paperback should be up already. I've also been trying to put together a social media marketing campaign for Chimera. So I've just been getting a lot of things ready for launch, and that has really been taking up all of my time. It's going to be a steady grind for me from here until November when Resurgence launches, but this is what we sign up for when we decide to become independently published authors. It's a lot of work. It's not just writing the book. It's doing everything else that a publishing house would take care of you if you were traditionally published. So that's the marketing, that is getting all the promo ready, uploading the files, doing all the tech things on the Amazon side and on the other online platforms as well. But I am really excited for the next month of the podcast. I have some amazing guests scheduled. Over the next month, I have some great interviews that I've lined up. I've done a number of them already, and a couple more that are coming that I can't wait to share with you guys. But today, we kick off with our guest, T.A. Bruno. So let me read his bio, and then we'll get started with the interview. T.A. Bruno grew up in a suburb south of Chicago and moved to the Los Angeles area to pursue a career in the film industry. Since then, he has brought stories to life for over a decade as a Pre-Vis artist. At home, he is the proud father of 2 boys and a husband to a wonderful wife. He wrote his first trilogy of novels in the early 2020s, The Song of Kamaria. The Song of Kamaria includes the books In the Orbit of Sirens, On the Winds of Quasars, and At the Threshold of the Universe. Let's jump to the interview. Hello and welcome again to the greatest podcast in the multiverse. I am super happy today to have with me T.A. Bruno. Welcome here, Tom.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
I'm really happy to have you here. Tom, why don't you kick us off here and just tell us a little bit about yourself and your writing journey?
Sure. So I'm, as Herman has said, I am T.A. Bruno, or Tom, if you just want to call me Tom. I only changed it because there's another guy named Tom Bruno, and I didn't want to step on his toes.
Gotcha.
And I am a writer of science fiction. I've written 4 books, starting with with the Song of Kamaria trilogy, which is In the Orbit of Sirens, On the Winds of Quasars, and At the Threshold of the Universe. And I just published a standalone that's kind of like loosely connected. You don't need to read that trio to understand it, called Down Below Beyond. And I've been doing this since, I want to say I started in like 2018 or so, but I didn't publish In the Orbit of the Sirens until about 2020, which was hilarious because it features like a big, like a lung affecting virus. And I had no idea what would happen in 2020. So I was like, a lot of people were like, "Oh, you wrote a book with that?" And then I'm like, I had no idea.
Yes.
Anyway, but yeah, and I work in the film industry, so that is my real life job, and I kind of just I've always wanted to write a story, and for a long time, some people may have heard this before, but like I was going to make what In the Orbit of Sirens eventually became was originally going to be like a 5-minute animated short. And as I'm making it, and I got like 4.5 minutes into the thing, it's almost done. And right as I was at the finish line, I'm like, this story isn't complete, and I have way more story to tell. So I started outlining, and then lo and behold, eventually you have a threesome of books. And it's all there. And it was started just with like trying to do it the way I thought I should. And then I'm like, no, I'm just going to buckle down and write it. And I'm very happy with it. It seems like people really like it. And it came out better than I hoped for. I never thought I'd get 3 out, let alone 4, let alone 2. It's one of those, like, you write one, you're like, I'm going to try this thing. It sounds very hard. Not a lot of people I know have done it. And then you do it and you're like, whoa, cool, I did it. And then I did it 3 more times.
And you can't stop.
Yeah, now I'm stuck. It's like, crap, now I got to keep writing.
Awesome.
No, I very much enjoy it.
Yeah, that's good. I think a lot of people are very happy about that. When I was looking for guests, your name continued to pop up. So I think a lot of people are really happy with the books that you write. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Especially about your latest release. But, first, it sounds like you really had a background in storytelling before you started the writing thing. What was kind of your first foray into storytelling? And, did you think that you'd be writing novels before you kind of started out with Orbit of Sirens and got into that process after you created the short?
So it's interesting. For some reason, I've always thought I was going to write at least one book in my life. And, as a kid, it kind of felt like I got to really climb all the way up this like kind of impossible ladder and really direct myself into that field. And so, which I was not doing. I was very art focused, although I did great in all of my literature and English classes. And I loved reading as a kid. And I would write little comic books and stuff, but I always thought that I couldn't, there's no way I had what it took to write a book, So as you said, I do have a storytelling background, but it wasn't in writing for a long time, just because I didn't really trust myself with that, which is funny in hindsight now. But like back then, I was like, no, there's no way. Writers they have to go to Harvard or some fancy school or something like that. There's no way. Yeah. But then, I started actually reading some self-pub books, and I'm like, wait, no, you can self-pub now. And so my thought process was like, okay, I will write something for me, and then it will be real, and that's all that matters. If no one buys it, I don't care. And so I went from writing little comic books, and I still got them. They're on my shelf back here. They start as far back as 3rd grade, and then there were some I did in high school, and then there was a few I tried in college actually, which are still kind of cool, like graphically, and all those kind of morphed into what eventually became In the Orbit of Sirens. Cool. But yeah, so when I started my career in the film industry, I work in layout Pre-Vis. Pre-visualization is the long version of the word, but it just does not roll off the tongue very well. And it is basically all storytelling. So we basically take an idea for a big budget action sequence or something. I've worked on a lot of some of the Marvel movies, I currently work for DreamWorks at the moment. It's kind of the same deal, except it's animation now. So we do what I call the talkie bits too. But anyway, we take an idea that's kind of rough, and they're like, okay, we want something cool to happen. But within that, it needs to be story based. So we will, go like, okay, well, what story do we want to tell? How do we still tell that visually? How do we tell it quickly and effectively and entertainingly? And so for a while, I'm like, this is starting to build my brain up with like a lot of information of like how to effectively tell a story and quickly, like with a good pacing. And we also worked directly with a lot of big directors and stuff, so we got to kind of pick their brains a little bit about like, oh, how does like I worked on Ready Player One, so Spielberg, like, oh, what is he trying to say here? Whose perspective are we following? Why are we following it? Why do we do certain things, not other things? And it was like, towards the end of that, I'm like, I feel like I can do this now,
Right.
But yeah, so and then. As I think that answered your question. I might have side railed it.
That's okay. I'm not sure. I'm not even sure if you answered my question either, but that was really cool. So
I hope that was entertaining.
I'm happy for it. So what's your part in all of that? Are you writing scenes? Are you kind of structurally putting things together? What does that look from your side of things when you're working on these films?
Yeah. So as far as like the actual pen and paper writing and stuff, no, not at all. So it's really, but we take, so how is the best way to describe this? It sounds weirder than it is. Like everybody thinks, making a movie, it's a well-oiled machine or whatever. It's not. It's like farming with cats. It's a miracle that a movie gets made. But here's a typical how it used to be. DreamWorks is a little more structured because it's animated, so it kind of has to be a little more locked in. By the time we get it, it's storyboarded out, and we even get a lot of the real voice actors a lot of the time. But if we take it back a step to the earlier part of my career and what I was doing when I first wrote in the Orbit of Sirens, some of it was like cool action scene, and this happens in it. That's it. So there is no dialogue. There is no. There's nothing except like this needs to be cool, and no one has seen it before. So from there, it's like, okay, so what's the story we want to tell? We got to really buckle in on that, and then like, okay, so if I'm going to use just characters, if Captain America has to do this, then okay, if we want to show a few things that he can do while he does this, and then he learns this by the end of it, kind of thing. So we're doing it, but yeah, I'm not actually writing anything down. It's all just very much like telling a story visually for the most part. And I feel like that kind of flowed into how my action scenes work a lot. A lot of people are like, oh yeah, it's like a movie, and I just kind of treat it same way. Every sentence is a shot. It's just the way, and it's fast, and every sentence leads to the end of the fight and furthering the plot at the same time. So,
right. Okay. Yeah, cool. So, and I've heard you speak a little bit about your background a little bit, but for our listeners that maybe haven't, can you let us know maybe some of the projects you have worked on? Because you've got quite an impressive backlist.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I have worked, so I've been working since about 2011. And it's funny because you think you're going to remember every single thing you worked on, but you don't. There's going to be things that slip through. But the first movie I ever worked on, I grew up near Chicago, in a suburb south of it. And what was funny is I was, I had just graduated college for film and animation, and I was looking for jobs. And I had just done some TV work for a place, and now I was like, okay, I'll apply at more things. And I thought that was just going to be my life. Every 2 weeks, it was going to be something different. Eventually, I applied for a Maya generalist for a project called Autumn Frost, which I'm like, all right, sound kind of like a stripper, but it's like, cool, whatever, I'll do whatever. I get the call up, and they're like, okay, so this is going to be the new Superman movie, directed by Zack Snyder. And I'm like, oh, okay, very. Yeah. I'm like, so what do I have to do with that? Because I just applied to be a Maya generalist. I'm like, and then they're like, oh, it's Pre-Vis. And I didn't know what that was until literally they showed me on my first day working for them, being paid for that. And then I was just like, oh yeah, I get what that is. I just kind of faked it a little bit.
Yeah, fake it till you make
But anyways, Yeah, a little. I mean, I was already made it, but now it's like, okay, now pretend like you knew ahead, but just
Yeah.
learn very, very quickly.
Yeah.
You know? But anyway, so yeah, first project was Man of Steel. And then
Very
there,
cool.
I had also worked on 42 with Chadwick Boseman after that. That was after I moved to LA, and then I kind of started getting regular work for a couple different. Well, it was one bit studio at a time, but I've kind of stayed wherever I am for years or whatever. Anyway, so it worked at 42 with Chadwick Boseman. We did some of the Marvel movies like Captain America: Winter Soldier, Guardians of the Galaxy. I have them all on my shelf. I would turn around and look at it and do it, but I think that would affect the audio.
It's all good.
But anyway, what else? Black Panther, which was kind of cool because I had worked with on 42, and then now Black Panther.
Right.
I'm like, oh, cool! I get to see Chadwick again, and
Cool.
and what else? Oh boy. Anyway, now the more later stuff that I've been working on recently. I recently had done the new Puss in Boots movie. Um, I also did Trolls 2. I was not part of Trolls 3 though, because I'm busy with something else that I cannot talk about.
Okay.
And I think that's the great. Oh, Ready Player One. I had mentioned that was a fun one.
Yeah.
And I think those are the greatest hits. And I'm sure I'm leaving one out that I feel a little bad about, but yeah.
That's fine. That's fine. It gives us a great sense of of the breadth of projects you've worked on. And you've talked a little bit about it already, but with your experience in with those type of films, how does that influence your writing?
Oh yeah. From that smorgasbord, you got a little sampler. Most of those are action-heavy book or movies. Sorry, and so that has affected greatly how I tell action scenes and pacing. And movies in general, I think, has affected my pacing. I'm very thankful that a lot of readers who have left feedback have said like the pacing is great, like it's breakneck, but not like scary. It's not like too much at once. I like that they like the pacing. I try to keep it entertaining the entire time, and I do get knocked sometimes for not having overly flowery language. But that's just because I don't know how to write that stuff. So it's very kind of clinical and fast and effective, but keeping it entertaining and fun. As you see in a lot of those movies, there's a little bit of fun element to them. So I try to, even if it gets heavy in spots, I'm still going to try and lighten it just a little bit. Not so forced as some of the Marvel stuff, not to knock on that, but still try to like inject a little bit of life and humor into some of even the heavier stuff.
Right.
But yeah, and just overall, how do characters? A lot of my characters will develop through actions. Like I might not tell you exactly what happened, but if you go back or if you're reading it, you'll probably catch on it. Hopefully, I hope to convey it. Is that the things they're doing are kind of the answer to their mentality and what's going on within them. So
Yeah.
it's
Okay.
all actions.
No, that's great. Like, has it influenced the way you look at story structure at all, and while you're developing the overall plot arc?
Yes, I would say so. And it's weird because you work on a movie and it's going to be at most 2 and then sometimes 3 hours lately. So
Yeah.
you got to cram a lot into a short amount of time, and you also have to convey a lot quickly. And that's where you get a lot of the like tropes that people are kind of tired about. Where I can't think of a specific example, but you get that. I understand that part of it, and as a reader, I'm like, okay, well, how do I take what makes the flow of a movie work, but also make it big and expansive enough to like fill a novel, and so I try to. I know where I'm starting and I know where I'm ending, and I will try to outline ahead of time. But I know a lot of the time I kind of like I'll do the outline knowing, okay, this is a story. It's got a beginning, middle, end. It's got some cool stuff. But I have to also figure it out as I'm writing it. And I think there was Neil Gaiman, the masterclass he did where, your first draft is like a grenade going off. And then the second draft is where you pick up all the pieces and try and see what survived, or you pretend like you know what
Right.
you were doing the whole time. And it's a little bit like that, where I have this, I get how a story works and like what makes characters likable, stuff like that, but I need to inject it throughout a longer storytelling form.
Gotcha.
Movies have helped, but reading has also helped a lot more, I feel like. And I just kind of try to microburst what I know about entertaining movies into long form. So
Right. That's great. That's quite a perspective to have, because I know even for myself watching movies, obviously you kind of get, it's a quick way to digest some of those beats, but
mhm.
you don't get a lot of the depth that you do in a book. That's why people say
Right.
the book's always better than the movie, right? Because
Oh
you
yeah.
can get, you get inside the character's head, you get a little bit more of the depth, but
Mhm.
where movies excel, you get those beats and you kind of get the structure for moving a plot along, and
Yes.
what the reader's expecting at each stage of the story.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I try to like make a beast that's like both, or it's got that, those microburst, really fun, entertaining Hollywood crap in it. And then it's
Yeah,
also got long form, broader picture kind of cool stuff. So
absolutely.
actually, some of the objective with the Song of Kamaria trilogy was to take what I like about classic sci-fi and not only kind of modernize it, but kind of like inject action and modern Hollywood kind of stuff into it. And I know
Okay.
the Hollywood's kind of a bad word to use, but you know what I mean? Or it's got like,
Yep.
oh, big visual effect, cool set piece stuff that, back then they thought it was just cool to go up into space. That's it,
Right.
period. So
Yeah.
now we think what is cool is a lot different. So I tried to
Mhm.
take like, oh, okay, well, I like the element of exploration from old stuff, but
Gotcha.
I also want to make it really, really exciting and really cool for a modern audience. And so hopefully that makes sense. Or
Yep.
it's just like I'm
Definitely.
just trying to make it cool again, like, but it still has that old.
Yeah.
It's got a little bit of an aftertaste of a classic sci-fi novel. So
Right. Yeah. Because, like you said, the classic sci-fi was a lot about exploration, discovering new
mm,
places, discovering new species, and that sort of thing. But a lot of it was really slow moving and kind of dry, because it was
mhm.
just a lot about the process of getting there. That it was about the imagination, but it wasn't necessarily the action movies that are big right now, like the Marvel movies and that sort of thing. So if you're injecting the wonder of that discovery with the action beats of a movie, then I think that is what you're aiming for, is what it sounds like to me.
Oh yeah, yeah, you nailed it.
Perfect.
And it
Awesome.
seems to work.
Yeah.
I'm glad, because as as a writer, and you're probably like this too. You want to write for you, right?
Mhm.
Like you write for, at least I do it. I write for myself, and then I hope everyone else likes it.
For sure.
And turns out if you do that, you're probably going to find the people that are like just like you, who have been starving for something like this. And
Absolutely.
there you go.
Yeah, and as writers too, we spend so much time with our manuscripts that I think if you don't like it, you're just torturing yourself. Because
Yes, and it's like, who is
you're sitting with
supposed to like this? Oh
yeah, I
man.
mean, because you're sitting with a manuscript for months, years, sometimes, right? So if you don't like it, then then it's not worth doing, I think.
Right. Yeah. Or it's time to like really inject something else into it to like, oh, okay, how do I make myself like this? So far, I have
Exactly,
not done that,
exactly.
but I'm, 4 books in, it's bound to happen at some point. Like if fifth book, sixth book, I don't know, but it's bound to happen to me.
Yeah, but no, that's a good point though too, because if you're working on a manuscript and you find yourself, and I have found this where I'm like, I'm just not feeling the story, and it's usually because there's an element that should be happening, you're missing a beat
Mm,
or something like that, to that you really have to kind of take a look at what is the story lacking, and why isn't it working? Why am I not enjoying it at this time? And sometimes it's just stepping back and looking at other stories, and not necessarily looking at stories for specific ideas, but just ingesting stories. And
hmm.
sometimes your brain just snaps and it's like, no, this is what it needs. And it might
Yes.
just be completely unrelated to anything that I've watched or read at that moment. But I find that the brain kind of picks up on what the story is actually missing if you just kind of step back for a minute.
Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think that's like the best way Even if you're writing between book, or like you're between two books you've written, and you want to write another one or anything, just like exposing yourself to everything, whether it be movies, video games, whatever. Eventually, that itch is going to come back, and you're like, man, I can write a story a little like this, but I would do it this way, very different. I mean, even Down Below Beyond, the book I just released, I had listened to the audiobook for Gateway by Frederick Pohl, and
Okay.
I'm like, oh, I like the idea of, and they use the word prospectors as well, but I took it a very different direction. But it was just that switch in my head that I'm like, okay, I like the idea of people gambling their lives to, for some kind of score, and they don't know, it's very dangerous. They could die at any moment doing it and that kind of thing. And that, just reading that, and I'm like, okay. And then it's almost like a different path. I just went this way with it, and they went a very different way with it. And I think that's like how a lot of great stories are written, where it's just like, oh, that's a cool idea, but what if we did this?
Yeah, so, exactly. Yeah. Pulling inspiration from those who went before us, right? And so you touched on definitely two topics there I want to get deeper into. First of all, I'd like to know some of the other authors that have inspired you, and what pieces of them have you pulled into your works?
Oh, yeah. Well, as I mentioned, Gateway by Frederick Pohl was a big one for specifically Down Below Beyond. And a little bit of, actually, The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. Only because that's a great, like, friends to enemies kind of, plot line. So I've always just loved that. I'll admit, I never actually read the book. But the movie that was made in, like, the early 2000s or whatever was fantastic. Anyway, good story.
It's funny. Yeah, it's funny. I've had someone, I can't remember who else I was talking to about that story lately.
Oh.
And that seems very random. But they were saying
it's a classic.
Yeah. But they were saying the book actually, they were saying the movie was horrible compared to the book. So it might be worth going back and checking out the book. I believe I read the book, but it was, in university. It was a long time ago. But it's just funny that you mentioned that.
I have it, but it's gigantic. I'll admit, I'm a little bit of a slow reader, so and I liked the movie as a kid. I think it hit me at like the right time. Like, swords, cool, yeah. I was a kid when it came out.
Cool.
Anyway, so that's a little bit of one. I also am a big fan of Werner Vinge, and the A Fire Upon the Deep and A Deepness in the Sky. Those might be my two favorite books. And there's a little bit of like what he does with his aliens. I thought it was kind of like a very enlightening reading experience, because I'm like, oh, I like the way that there's familiar aspects to them, but they are still very much not human, and that kind of blew my mind as far as that goes. What else? Hold on, let me just turn around real quick.
Yeah, no worries.
Oh, the Foundation trilogy by Isaac Asimov, although I cannot watch the new TV show. I tried, and it's just not the same. All power to people that like that stuff. But the books were fantastic. And Neuromancer is another good one, William Gibson, which I have not read anything else by him, because he's a little difficult to read, but I just clicked with Neuromancer a lot, and I don't know why. I think those are my biggest ones, but there's some newer authors as well, which I wanted to take what I like about classic novels and then inject some modern elements into them. And so there's the Space Between Worlds by Micaiah Johnson. That was odd, and I don't know if I got her name right. I apologize, but that was an excellent novel. And then same with Adrian Tchaikovsky, Elder Race, and the Children of Time. Sorry, I'm like, you'll notice I'm looking around. I have literally bookshelves all over my room, so I'm looking at them, and I'm like, there's Children of Time. Yeah, exactly. There's Becky Chambers as well, one of my favorites, and actually her novella To Be Taught If Fortunate is one of like my favorite reads that I've read.
Oh, really?
Like it's
I haven't
really
read that one
really
yet.
cool. Yeah, and that's a big like just the way I forget the word for it, but like they change their bodies to suit the environment instead of like using technology to work with the environment. I thought that was so cool. It's got a cool name too, and I cannot remember it. But through that, they're also learning a little bit about themselves and stuff like that. And just phenomenal. I think those are my top.
Very cool.
I'm like
Very cool.
double checking. There's a lot more, but I can go on all day.
Definitely. No, I mean definitely some modern classics in there as well. So that's great. So tell me about your latest book and what it is all about.
Oh yeah, that thing. So it's called Down Below Beyond, and it's about a guy named Lavort Atra, who is a prospector for the Fessenag fleet, and he's tasked with going down to this kind of a husk ancient world called Teox to just kind of find valuable things, sell them to the fleet. That's his day in day out. His best friend Bayfo is kind of like his escort, his enforcer escort, who he's basically kind of like for lack of a better term, he's like an enforcement officer for the fleet. But they grew up together, so they're still kind of friends. There's a lot of banter and stuff between them. And basically, he has to keep an eye on Lavort, and this is just how it's always been until one day Lavort finds something he's not supposed to find, and stakes a claim to it, and that leads to a whole bunch of stuff happening that eventually makes him pretty much like the most wanted man in load space, and therefore adventure ensues.
So, and you talked a little bit about it already, but what was the inspiration behind the book?
Oh yeah, and like I said, I won't go back over it, but Gateway by Frederick Pohl was a big one. But I also I've always wanted to write like a book that I not minor spoiler. It is a friends to enemies type story, and I've always wanted to write that, but I wasn't ready before the Song of Kumar. So I'm like, okay, I think now I'm ready. I think I can pull this off. And it kind of taps into some of my own personal experiences of just like what is a real friend, what is a toxic friendship. Like Bayfo, the entire book, it's a little subtle at first, but he's never cool to Lavort. Like it comes out, it's played to you that way. Like it's played in a way that's like, oh, they're friends. They're going to a thing that they used to do all the time. But if you look into it, you're like, oh, Lavort always hated this thing, and Bayfo knows that, kind of stuff like that. So it's a toxic friendship. And a lot of people have had those, I myself included. If anyone's watching, like, is it me? Is it? Was it me? Was it me? Then? No. But it was a long time ago. But So I wanted to write a story that kind of like was sci-fi and very sprawling. There's a portal element to this, not dimensions, just being able to travel between different planets and stuff like that. And I wanted to just kind of build a new playground to potentially write a lot more stories in. So I built this thing. I used something from the Song of Kumaria, but this would be set like thousands of years after that. Humans are a little scarce in this whole setup, and it's kind of a conglomeration of worlds called Load Space that it's all kind of ruled by the Fessenag fleet. But there's a grander element to it that's these things called the Voyalton have built big portals that can kind of take you to any world they've been to that said it was cool to put a portal there. So they go to many worlds. Some worlds are like, no, don't do that, and they're like, okay, cool, they leave. But anyway, it's a place. So the smaller element of that is Load Space, where just this Fessenag fleet has kind of created a trade empire between I want to say 13 or 14 different worlds. But our guy Lavort, he actually goes to he's stuck on Teox for a long time, but he finds this thing that allows him to travel to all these different planets. I think you go to I want to say 14 worlds in Down Below Beyond. I never actually officially counted. Some of them are very brief. There's a couple that are like a sentence long. He's just there for just a brief shot, kind of thing.
Yeah, so let's talk about the worlds a little bit. You have 14 different worlds. How did you create the world or the universe that this was in, and how did you come up with the ideas for these different worlds? Were they just kind of on the fly? Did you have specific reasoning for each of the different planets that you created?
Oh yeah. So a lot of them kind of come from just what inspires me about old classic sci-fi. Now a lot of them do seem kind of one note because, like I said, you're there very briefly. I also tried to keep this novel kind of short because my other novels they're not super long. They're like 500 pages, which is fine, But I wanted to keep this one closer to 300 or so, and I think it's like 350. Anyway, the worlds though are all different worlds that I thought. I usually start with what interests me about Earth, because that's where I grew up. It's where most people grew up.
Really?
Anyway,
That's interesting.
yeah, right. Anyway, but for instance, like Old Faithful, the cool geyser, the way that the minerals and sulfur work around that, you get like yellow and like deep blues and stuff like that. So I took just that idea or something like that, right? And then I make Vanspar, which is a world that's covered. And I'm like, what is also something I have not seen? Well, a world of boiling water would be really, really cool. Where it's like constantly thermal vents, small rocky islands, but then really, really deep, cold caves on the inside, which, I don't think scientifically that could totally work, but we're working with sci-fi fantasy. Yay. So, please allow a little bit of fiction in this science fiction. But anyway, it's, stuff like that, where I just wanted to like take worlds, but make them surprising. There's also a big one called Bloom, which is just, you know, uh, all the surface area of Bloom is covered in little wildflowers, and the biggest thing that lives on there is like a grasshopper. Like it's not sentient; it's just a bug. It's like a world that nobody should really see, but it's beautiful. And
Right.
just the fact that the whole thing is covered in flowers, and even a little bit of the moon nearby, you could see flowers from a distance on it. Very, very, far back or whatever. But then some of them came from like, okay, I started with the aliens that would live there, and then I'm like, okay, well, what kind of environment would that thing like? So let's see. We have these things called the Fluctons, which are kind of like seals. And they got like kind of a seal looking body, for lack of a better term, and they're great at being underwater. So they come from a world that's mostly underwater, but it has big areas of giant cities. But they're also technologically advanced, and they know that, okay, we're part of this trade network. We got to be able to go to other places. So they use these things called flit skippers to just kind of like walk around. They're like kind of spider legs with arms and stuff. So it's like a seal with like goggles and stuff, and like a little robot, and it can like kind of manipulate it with its face and flippers and stuff like that. And so, yeah. So sometimes it was like, oh, cool thing I know about real world biology or geography. Sorry. And then sometimes it would start with alien first. Cool. Where's it live? Kind of thing.
Right.
So, and it was fun the
Very
whole
cool.
time. I was just, I spent a lot of time just brainstorming with my friends, like, oh, like let's come up with an alien together. Two of my friends, Maria and Jason, helped me make up two of the aliens, and then we just built worlds around them too. And it was
awesome.
fun. Yeah, I tried to make it as fun as possible the whole time.
Definitely sounds like you had a ton of fun writing it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. So you touched a little bit on, you mentioned it briefly. I'd like to just dig a little bit deeper into it. Science fantasy. What is science fantasy, and how is it different from science fiction?
Yes. So it's funny. When I first started writing, I figured science fiction was just science fiction. Pew pew lasers. That's it. I was told afterward by some reviewers that is not the case. It's like a gradient. Like I feel like it goes from hard to light sci-fi, right? And I put science fantasy at that light end of the whole gradient, right? Whereas hard sci-fi would be something more like The Expanse, where it's a lot of military sci-fi falls into hard sci-fi, where it's got a lot more reality to it, right? Science fantasy and light fantasy, we're gonna have, for lack of a better term, more fun. Like we're just gonna like play with. It might not happen, and there might be no physical way this could ever happen. Like or no, that would be a spoiler. I won't do that. But to bring it to something everybody knows, Star Wars is science fantasy. Even Dune is science fantasy, because it just has, which is interesting because it doesn't feel like it. But then you're like, well, giant sandworms, worms can't. Sand doesn't work like that. It's stuff you could pick it apart like crazy, but at the same time, it's and then the mentats and the way spaceships work and spice and all that. It actually pulls it into science fantasy. Star Wars, you got laser swords, zappy guns, the Force, kind of stuff like that. Same with mine are still, they're science fantasy, but I would still put them a little edged out of what Star Wars is, because I do try to give you a little bit of that like okay, this could happen in reality. Like the way spaceships kind of work. It works the
Okay.
same. Like I try to keep that real. And when they're up in space and they're not on anything that's specific, they might be in zero gravity and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. And I understand how like Newtonian physics and stuff work, but I try to keep that as light as possible. But it is there
Yeah.
sometimes.
Okay.
Depending on the book. Like I said, Down Below Beyond, less so, because I just wanted to go nuts. I wanted to just have a fun sci-fi adventure romp, through the galaxy. There's a lot of somebody described them as rubber suited aliens, like they're people at a movie set wearing just a rubber. And I'm like, you know what? Yeah, sure. Some of them are. I mean, there's one that's like
Right.
a giant tick, like a bug. That definitely could not be a dude in a suit. But like
Right.
for the most part, yeah, we're having fun here. Like they
Yeah.
all evolve that way? No, not at all. My Song of Kamaria trilogy is a little bit harder about that stuff. Like I use what I know about biology and stuff like that, and I try to ground it a little bit more. So I would put that as like a slightly harder version of sci-fi than what Down Below Beyond is. But yeah, no, but I don't have the what should the intelligence to actually do like a hard sci-fi. I'm just not smart enough. I don't want to pretend to be smart enough. I would rather not insult somebody by pretending to sound smart so I'm like, just screw it. Go for fun. Let's have fun.
Yeah.
As long as I don't write, like Batman versus Superman in space. I think I've done an okay job. I'm not insulting anybody.
Yeah.
It's not mindless
Right.
or anything. It's just fun.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I don't know if it's necessarily about intelligence as it is about research, because I think
Yes.
a lot of the hard sci-fi fans are very particular about their details, and I'm the same way. I'm not, my series, my latest series, it's not that, I wouldn't call it fantasy, but it's not hard sci-fi either. I try to have some, reasonable explanations for things, but there's some things like artificial gravity, which just, there's no hard science for that right now.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it really is hard to move the plot along if you don't have artificial gravity. So
It is.
there's some hand waving in there, but it's light, it's light sci-fi. So I totally get you on the, not wanting to go down the Andy Weir route or the Expanse route where, there's calculations in there that I don't understand.
Exactly. And they do it so well. I don't want to step on their toes. I'd rather I love reading that. I just know it's like one of those frustrating things. It's like, oh, I love this. I cannot write that.
Yeah.
There's no way. I don't have a degree in it. I don't know how it works, but I get that he knows how it works. And that's important to me, I suppose. Yeah.
Exactly. So, yeah, I'm the same. I'm the same way. I'm definitely not that nerdy to go down that route.
Yes.
But I do enjoy reading it.
Yes, there's this is no shade on any of that. I love that stuff.
No, absolutely.
I know I use the words fun and I use the words like, oh yeah, and I kind of describe that as, but oh man, it's one of those like, wish I could do it. No, I can't.
Exactly. Yeah. Project Hail Mary, I think it's my favorite read of the year so far, for sure. And there's
a good one.
A lot of hard science in there that I would never be able to replicate. So I definitely appreciate it. But
me and my dad read that one actually. Actually, that's the funny thing. My dad loves hard sci-fi, and he really, and a lot of people that love hard sci-fi just don't go for the sci-fi fantasy stuff. They're like, well, they start thinking too hard about it. My dad, my own father, is the same way. But yeah, no, we both read Project Hail Mary, and man, it was super fun because we, call each other or like text each other. Oh, did you get to the end? It was super fun. I love that story, and I hear they're making a movie out of it. I don't know how far along.
That's what I've heard too.
Yeah,
I've heard that down as well.
I'd love to see it.
Absolutely. And I was going to ask you too about the reviewers. Have you found that labeling the book as science fantasy, has that helped kind of with readers' expectations of where on the spectrum the book belongs?
Hard to say. So I feel like there are people that have picked up my books that were expecting a harder sci-fi than I delivered. Which, I feel bad because I'm like, I'm sorry, guys. I try to make it really upfront too. Like in the beginning of Down Below Beyond, he fights a giant crab thing. Like, I hope that sets the tone, and I do that in all of them. Like within the first 5 pages is in the Orbit of Sirens. She's talking to a giant talking bird with a giant hook in its hand or whatever. So I try to establish that, and I do label them as science fantasy or science fiction fantasy or whatever. I feel like it changes kind of as I get better at this. I realize I'm wording it wrong. But so I try to do that. But on the flip side, I do feel like I have managed to find an audience that loves fantasy and wants to dip their toes into sci-fi, but like hasn't found the right book. And a lot of the readers that have done that leap with me have been very happy about it. And I've described it as like a gateway drug to sci-fi, and I kind of do write it in that way. And that I blame my mom for that in a good way. This is not a bad thing. She's often my first beta reader, and I do what I call, and she's aware of this, is not, no, I do what I call the mom test, right? Where my mom does love fantasy, like Harry Potter, all that stuff. She did before me. She really did not read sci-fi, but I'm like, but she was kind enough to like help me out, right? And she's got very great. She understands story excellently. Honestly, maybe I get it from her. It's genetic, I suppose. But what's cool is since she's less of a sci-fi reader, having her go through my book, and I would be like, okay, here's what I'm trying to say. Does it make sense to you? Luckily, most of the time, yes, yes, yes. But then she is the one, though, that catches like, okay, I didn't get this at all. So it's like, right. That didn't make any sense to me. So then I can take it and reword it, make it a more digestible, kind of thing. Or maybe the idea just wasn't working at all. Because I feel like no matter what happens, whether it be movies or books or anything, whoever's reading it or watching it or playing it, if it's a video game, whatever their opinion of it is the opinion that matters. It doesn't matter what I do. If I feel like, oh, I meant this, but they didn't get that, then it doesn't matter. That's right. What they got.
You can't explain to them. Yeah, you can't explain it to them later, right? You're not.
I can't go like, oh, hey, I meant this, man. So it's like, no, doesn't work that way. So whatever they say is what I go with. So luckily I have, my mom and other beta readers too, where they'll, kind of come in and be like, okay, this worked, this didn't. Actually, what's really funny is On the Winds of Quasars, Cade, who's like one of the main characters, right? The first draft that I gave to beta readers, they said, Cade sucks. They hated him. They didn't like him at all. They didn't like his arc. They didn't like anything he had to say. Every scene he was in sucked. And I'm like, oh, no, he's the main character that I was also going to take into the next book. So what I did was, I feel like there's you could get angry about that and be like, no, they're wrong, but I feel like you would be wrong if you did that. So I just took it and I'm like, okay, that's excellent advice, honestly. And I literally went through the entire book. I thought harder about like, okay, how can we make Cade likable, and let's change everything about him. Let's make him a guy we want to root for and all that stuff. And literally rewrote the entire everything he was in. Luckily, it follows 4 characters, so he's just one of 4. So it wasn't like I rewrote the whole book or anything. But every interaction with him, everything he did, his background, the whole first 2 chapters, I think, with him in it, totally changed and stuff. And honestly, the book is way better for it. Just having that input. And again, now I'm like, oh God, what was the question?
No,
but yes, reader input. And so, and that would be more like beta reader input, but still, it kind of goes down the line of, at the end result is going to be just more readers. You might as well catch that stuff up front.
Exactly. And that's the point of beta readers, correct? Mm-hmm. Yeah, how many beta readers do you typically use, if you don't mind me asking?
So, no problem. With the first book, I kind of I was new, so I didn't really know what to do. I had like 13 people, and like it didn't quite work out. Not all of them made it to the end, right? But they were all very helpful. The ones that kind of actually stepped in and read and gave a lot of good feedback and stuff like that. Actually, one of them is one of my friends from childhood, and he's still a friend now. We're really good friends. His dad was actually one of my beta readers, and he was hilarious because, I was his son's friend forever. And so he's reading it and he's leaving little marks. He's like, oh, hey, is this like when you guys were growing up and blah, 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 and stuff like. He caught all that stuff. But anyway, nice. So, with the first book, I used too many beta readers.
Okay.
But it was still helpful. I learned a lot, and I was also trying to do it via a method that wasn't quite working, where I tried to give them. It was like homework, I'd be like, "Oh, okay, read a chapter, then answer these 3 questions or whatever." Do not do that, in my experience.
No.
Maybe it works for some people, but it did not work for me. From what I've now, my refined result as of now with Down Below Beyond, and even at the Threshold of the Universe, less so with On the Winds of Quasars, was there's a company called Literary Titan, and they offer a beta reading service. I use them as kind of like a "you don't know me at all." This is gonna, and they are not always kind. Like I said, the whole Cade thing, that mostly came from them being
Okay.
brutally honest, and it was totally good. And it's not too expensive. I want to say it's like $80 or $90 for 2 people to do it. So I'll have those, random people kind of, they'll get them and do the whole thing. They give you a whole breakdown. It's also kind of up to you after that to understand what is useful, what is, going to work for me. What did they, are they not the right reader? Sometimes could be it, where it's like, oh, okay, he wanted this, but I'm not trying to deliver that. So that's okay. Kind of stuff. Just being able to critique yourself upon that critique. And then typically, mom will be part of it. And then I'll try and get maybe 1 or 2 if possible. But it also just depends. Like with In the Orbit of Sirens, it was my first book in that trilogy. So having a big net was fine because everybody was reading it for the first time. When I got to On the Winds of Quasars and at Threshold of the Universe, it's like, okay, they might only read this book. So their input is going to be valuable, but it is going to be, it's not going to be complete, because they may not have gone back and read it. Which is funny, though. I have had beta readers go like, I'm reading the rest of this now. And I'm like, oh, cool. All right. That was not the purpose of this, but that's very cool. And then same with Down Below Beyond. I just kind of hired a few and then had my mom help me out. And then I think 1 or 2 friends also helped me out. Just people that, if you got friends that understand story, which every one of my coworkers does, they're doing the same thing I'm doing. So they understand about it as well as I do.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, but
awesome.
And if you got like a good handle on, how story works, you can kind of take it from there. Hopefully, But it's all Sometimes you just don't know what's wrong with it. So
for sure, I early on I went the route of the paid beta reader as well, because I had the same problem with my first book. I sent it out to friends and different people, and the feedback I got was not that helpful. The limited feedback I got, because I did the same. Yeah, because I did the same kind of homework thing too, because I feel like that's the online advice that you get when you're first starting out. And,
probably the same person.
Probably. So in creating your exactly, it works for some. Every audience is different, so it didn't work for mine, didn't work for yours. That's okay. You eventually find a process that works for you, and you stick with it. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So what was the most difficult part in creating the world for your story?
Oh, okay. For this one, for Down Below Beyond, it kind of flowed very nicely. So that I won't answer for that one, because by now I got kind of a good handle on it. And like I said, I kind of took the universe from the Song of Kamaria trilogy. But I would say, going back, one thing I like to point out with On the Winds of Quasars and At the Threshold of the Universe specifically, there is a deaf community in both of them. And I had reached out to many people in the deaf community, and I had a friend of a friend, Triva, help me do deaf consulting. And I learned so much about that community. It is so interesting. It's kind of beautiful, too, and I'm grateful that I did it. And it kind of helped me grow not only as a person, but as a writer. But having them involved was super fun, super cool, and it makes the book stronger, too, which is also always great. But honestly, even if I wasn't writing a book, I'm so glad I did that. But that input and that research was probably the most difficult part, because I was nervous the whole time that I was going to do it wrong. So I went way out of my way to make sure I did it right. And I felt like it was important. I just hadn't really seen that in a sci-fi with like a major character. You see it with side characters a lot. And it's getting more and more, which is cool. I think now when I see it in movies, I'm like, oh, hey, cool, yeah. And it's cool because you see some of the readers that pick up your book, and they're like, oh, I grew up in a family with deaf parents, or like they have just different family members that are deaf, or they are deaf, and it's like so cool to hear that they enjoyed seeing that character. It's Nella, by the way, and in those books, and that I don't treat it as like a disability. It's the way I had it described was that it's as if they're from a different country and they're just like kind of a little bit out of their own country, and they're just trying to speak with people. So there's a little bit of that, like a small disconnect, but they function totally fine. And it's super. Yeah. And all that was very rewarding, but challenging. And I hope I did it justice. If I made any errors, that's on my end. But had a lot of help to try and make sure that got done right. So
yeah, I mean, it's good that you went to that community to get that input. I was listening recently to an interview with TJ Klune, who was saying similar things about writing from communities that you're not a part of, and making sure that you get input from those communities, because you don't want to input stereotypes into your work that you're not even aware that you have, and you want to get I want to say legitimate. That's not the word I'm looking for. You want to get a valid perspective from those communities, right? So,
And the input they had was awesome. It was so, and I felt so dumb with some of my first draft stuff when I first showed. I'm like, so here's an idea, like, so what's wrong with it? I know something's wrong with it, and I know a lot's probably wrong with it. And they told me, and it was, and I'm glad they did, kind of stuff. But it just too with Pre-Vis specifically. She literally went through the whole book and did a Nella pass for that character specifically. And it was so cool. Just like, she's involved in a conversation with two other people. And it's like, oh, she should probably do this, or, she would do this, or would she ask this question now, or get her involved here and stuff like that. And it was just great. I almost want to do that for like every character, like just have somebody like, okay, you're going to be Cade, you're going to be Nella. You just read the book and then tell me if they should chime in more, kind of thing. And it was just so cool. Cool. Yeah. No, that's
I love that. I love that. Very cool. So, and then I guess related to that, do you have a favorite character? Is it the same character that's your favorite in the book?
So this one's controversial, if you ask me, because not everybody jived with what Bayfo is in Down Below Beyond. He's the enforcer friend who, like I said, minor spoiler, here comes an enemy. Getting into his head was interesting for me. And like I said, I wrote him as he is not honest at all. I don't make that explicitly clear. I try to hopefully give you enough to like really take that home, I didn't quite nail it. I'll admit I didn't master what I was going for, but I do feel like he was still so interesting for me to write. Just seeing him go from like somebody we trust and look up to a little bit to somebody who's a little like he's just been completely brainwashed by the villain of the book, and he thinks he's right the whole time. That's another thing. I love writing villains that. Like they never, no villain sees themselves as the villain ever, and they will die thinking they're the hero, kind of thing. And but yeah, Bayfo specifically, he might have been one of my favorite characters ever to write. And I know he didn't land with everybody, but I still love thinking about him, And who else? So besides him, though, so that's the controversial pick, right?
But and I think though, if you wrote a villain that people don't like, you did your job.
Yeah. Right? Honestly, people did like say that. they're like, the thing I did here that made me smile and feel warm on the inside was that people were actively hating him, which you're you're supposed to. I think that's right. I'm no qualms with that reaction. But what they towards the very, very end of the book, they started to feel sad for him, and I'm like, yes. Okay. And I'm like, I made you sad a little bit, and I made you feel a little wrong. But it's very, very interesting. I'm trying to think of what I would say is Nella probably is the other favorite character, just because it was so interesting getting into like learning about it. And like I said, I grew as a person writing her, and I got to talk to so many cool people about that. And she is so cool. Like, it's one of those like characters that you have a plan, and they are still following the plan, but seeing it like really just explode on the page, you're like, hell yeah. It's so, and there's still like images that flash in my head. I'm like, I gotta make a damn movie out of this. And I just gotta animate a few of these scenes, or like, I don't know if you may have seen on like Twitter and Instagram, I draw a lot. And I've always been that way. Like I said, I used to draw little comic books of this stuff. But I have not done it with the characters from the Song of Kamaria, because I had finished that trilogy, and it's like still kind of my heart is soft. I'm like, oh, I don't want to hurt them anymore, or I don't want. I feel like part of me's like, I gotta leave them alone, kind of thing. They're done. They've put their stories put out, but I think I do got to start drawing some more stuff from that trilogy, because it's there's a lot in there that I love and that has changed me as a person and stuff. A lot of big moments too that would be cool to explore now that it's been out for a few years. It's one of those like you feel like you can't talk about it at first because you're like, oh, I don't want to spoil it, and especially with the third book, because they're like, oh, I don't want to tell you what it's about because it's major spoilers, but it's been out for like 2 years now. It's got a lot of robots and stuff in it. It's cool.
Cool.
But yeah.
So what can readers expect as they read your work, and what kind of emotional impact do you hope to have on them?
Oh yeah, expect big actiony set pieces, very very visual, kind of giant scenes. Epic is a played out word, but yeah, it works. Sprawling, I like to say, big sprawling atmosphere type of thing. A lot of world hopping, a lot of hopefully something different that plays with ideas you've seen, but in a way that hopefully you're not expecting too much. And I hope I like to do the payoff, like where I'm setting you up for something, and I hope by the end of it you are just like, wow, hell yeah, kind of thing. And I don't know if that's yep. I think that I had more, but I'm like, no, you know what? That's good.
That works. Awesome. So what can readers expect from you next? What are you working on?
Absolutely
what's the next
nothing.
Project?
No, I'm resting on my laurels for a little
You're
bit.
Done.
No, so it's one of those things that like I try to focus 1,000% on whatever I'm writing, and then when it comes out, I kind of like I treat it for a little while. I get out in the world and do all that stuff. But until a spark will hit at some point, and I have a few little ones that I'm like, okay, maybe I might do a Floman Vobsy standalone novel that's like a prequel to Down Below Beyond, because the whole point of Down Below Beyond is that it's a standalone novel. Which now I'm like, but I love those characters, so maybe it doesn't have. I mean, I'm the one that made that roll up. I don't have to do it. But anyway, I mean, there might be a sequel one day. Well, actually, one reviewer said it'd be cool to see other adventures in Load Space, but then circle back to this crew. And I'm like, that could happen potentially. So at the moment, nothing concrete, but I got a lot of little tiny ideas that if one just, and I'm like, okay, got to do it. Then I will get writing.
Right. That's cool. I like that you're leaving things open to return to the universe, though, because I think there's definitely a lot of potential there.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. It was kind of the mission, right? Like when I said, I'm like, okay, I want to make a new playground, and I do want to play in it. It's there. I just got to figure out what toys I want to move around inside of it now. And I'm even considering maybe doing I do a lot of tabletop RPGs with my friends. And we have done, multiple ones of, kind of like Dungeons and Dragons and stuff for the uninitiated, the non-nerds out there. But I'm curious to maybe develop a TTRPG, like lit RPG or whatever, in this Load Space setting. Could be interesting, or I might just do like a free-for-me kind of thing with my buddies and be like, maybe these are the characters we carry forward, and then Down Below Beyond can stay by itself and we do different characters. I don't know. Anyway, this is more just kind of like up in the air, have no idea what I'm doing now. Guess I'll focus on real work, I suppose. Maybe my family, I guess. Whoever they are, I don't know.
Awesome. Very cool. So, Tom, this is the greatest podcast in the multiverse. Can you tell us about how, in a parallel universe, a different choice may have shaped another version of your life?
Oh, yeah. Uh, let's see. If I if I didn't go to this bar one night and get really, really drunk, and then if I didn't answer a text message from a friend that I barely had talked to in like 6 years, then I would never have met my wife.
Really?
And that I would probably not be writing books. I'd probably still be living in Chicago trying to figure out what to do next. Maybe doing commercials or something like that. Probably never would have worked on a movie. Or even there, you can even take remember I said I had applied to be a Maya generalist and then I just showed up for something called Autumn Frost. If I just didn't do that day, if I didn't find that thing, I'd probably still just be in Chicago trying to figure crap out.
Right.
You know?
Wow.
So I was like, yeah, no, there's a couple instances. The older you get, the more there are.
Exactly.
You're like,
Yes.
how am I here?
There
what
really
did I
are.
do to get here?
Definitely.
But there's two.
And that, that was really the whole point behind that question, because, as you get old, like I'm in my 40s now, and I think, like there's so many things that if I, for some reason, fixated on something else 10 years ago, I could have went in a completely different direction. And, those, and something, I really like the story of Autumn Frost. I like that story because at the time you had no idea what you were showing up for.
I didn't even know what Pre-Vis was.
And now you're in California because of that choice. Yeah, that's fantastic. I love it. I love it. Yeah. Well, thank you, Tom, for joining me today. I really enjoyed our time together. Can you tell our listeners where they can find you?
Oh, yes. Well, thank you for having me. This was awesome. I had such a fun time here. And you can find me on whatever the state of social media is these days, but I'm at T.A. Bruno Author, all one word, on pretty much everything. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Twitter, whatever that's called now. Even a little bit of YouTube. You can YouTube. I don't do too much. I kind of put it's a hub for the book trailers and stuff I've made. Which, if you want to see those are pretty cool. And then I got a website at tabruno.com. Nice and easy. And that's got a lot of if you want to buy any of the books, there's all the links there. There's also reviews that other people have done that I get in there, and that's where you can find me.
Very cool. Well, thank you once again. I really enjoyed our time together.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed my chat with T.A. Bruno. If you did, hit that like and subscribe button. It really helps the channel out a lot. Please join me next week when I chat with Laura Juntonen. You may recognize that name best from her previous podcast called Read It With Whiskey. I was lucky enough to be interviewed on her podcast while it was still going. She decided to take a step back from that to focus on her writing. We talk all about that next week, and we also talk about her series, the Shockwave series, and her new prequel novella, The Fall. That novel releases next week as well. We chat all about it. I hope you join us. Take care. Bye now. Thank you for joining me. If you enjoyed the show, like and subscribe on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Greatest Podcast in the Multiverse. As well, you can help support the show by supporting me on Patreon. For as little as $5 a month, you can get early access to the show, as well as submit your questions for my upcoming guests. I hope to see you next time. Bye now.